Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Strategic Planning and Organizational Assessment. My name is Sabrina Hauser. I'm the owner of Capital CFO, and this webinar is brought to you in partnership with Integra HR. On the webinar today, we have two Capital CFO consultants, Katie Stair and Liz Chipman, and from Integra, we have Jennifer Massey. So welcome all. On our next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what Capital CFO does. Capital CFO is a company that outsources chief financial officers and bookkeepers for companies and nonprofits that need the experts, just not necessarily full-time. So we outsource our chief financial officers and bookkeepers. We also help with recruitment and hiring. We are not a staffing agency, but we do help with finding you your next hire. And we also have consulting services for nonprofits, and you can take a look at our website to see all of the services that we offer. I'm now going to turn it over to Jennifer so she can give us a breakdown of Integra.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you for having us. It's been great to partner with you and your team. A little bit about Integra HR. I'm Jennifer Massey. I'm the president and co-founder. We are a full-service HR and business consulting service practice. And as you can see, we offer a variety of different services as outlined here. However, many times we also want to bring together partners and other people within the network. We may not have an area of expertise, but we do have good connections and really try to support our clients in connecting them with the correct resources. So that's also something that we do to provide additional support to our clients. So again, thank you so much for having us, and I'll turn it over to Liz.
Thanks, Jennifer. You will notice throughout the webinar that the four of us will be kind of switching off webinar duties or narration duties. So I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. If you are calling in by phone and don't have access to the video portion and have questions during this webinar, please email questions to Katie at capitalcfollc.com. That's Katie at capitalcfollc.com. She'll be monitoring her emails throughout, and we'll try and address your questions. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can reach out to us using the chat box, and of course we'll be checking that chat box throughout the webinar. And also, please submit your questions and comments at any time during the webinar. We have a lot of content today, so we won't be stopping as often for questions as we might have in some other webinars. So please, as questions arise or you have comments, please enter them in the chat box, and we will be monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we will try to address them as we go, and then again at the end. And also wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we'll provide it to you. Everyone who's registered will get the recording of the webinar along with our tools and templates at the end, and please feel free to share that recording with anyone you think would benefit. So with housekeeping out of the way, I just want to again remind you that we will be talking about strategic planning and organizational assessment today for this webinar. So in order to frame our discussion, I just wanted to go over some steps to strategic planning, and these are this kind of the traditional framework for strategic planning, and it will give you a framework and a starting point for what we'll be discussing today. So in a traditional strategic planning mode, first you will identify your mission statement, and this is true for businesses as well as nonprofits. Have a clear idea of what your mission is, what your purpose is. You will create a vision for your future. In other words, take where you are now and then envision where you want to be 3 to 5 years from now. Develop core values and principles. Again, this is vitally important for both businesses and nonprofits. And then you will create long and short-term objectives. This is really the first concrete step for strategic planning. After you do that, you will establish your action plan with timelines. And this piece right here, this establishing action plan with timelines, is really what we're going to focus in on today for the next hour or so. And then after that, you'll develop a communication plan and then implement and monitor your plan. The goal, obviously, is to have a strategic plan that is a living, working document, not something that you just do as an exercise and then put on a shelf. So again, these are the steps for strategic planning, just to either remind you or introduce you to them. And that's what's going to frame our discussion today. And we're really going to focus in on that fifth step, establishing your action plan with timelines. And we hope to give you some real concrete ideas and steps to take away today. So we're going to start with a question. Do you have a strategic plan for your organization? Yes or no, or I'm not sure. Take a minute to enter your answers. And so like a little over half of you have a strategic plan and the rest of you either know or aren't sure. Great, I'm glad you're here. We're going to give you some really concrete steps to take away so that you can develop a strategic plan and moving forward. Great. Now I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and she's going to tell you about something called the Balanced Scorecard.
Great, thank you, Liz. So today we're going to feature the Balanced Scorecard as a template and a model to be used for strategic planning. Of course, there are several different ways to approach strategic planning, but we really feel like this offers a very balanced approach to planning and includes many of the perspectives that a business or organization should consider as you're doing your strategic plan. So a little bit about the plan to start with. The Balanced Scorecard is a strategic planning and management system developed by the Harvard Business School that organizations use to communicate what they are trying to accomplish, align day-to-day work that everyone is doing with strategy, prioritize projects, products, and services, measure and monitor progress towards strategic goals. The name Balanced Scorecard comes from the idea of looking at strategic and often intangible measures in addition to the traditional financial measures to get a more balanced view of performance. So really what we think this tool does is it takes us a step beyond traditional strategic planning efforts to look at the full picture of what influences the financial perspective. So the Balanced Scorecard, as you can see here, looks at 4 perspectives: financial, customer, innovation and learning, and internal business perspectives. And it's important to note as you look at the image here that all of the perspectives don't necessarily work in one direction. They really cross-sect, they intersect, and they work well together as a well-rounded and strategic approach to planning. So we're going to get started. We're going to review each of these perspectives. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sabrina to talk about the financial perspective.
Thanks, everybody, and good morning again. So I'm going to talk about the most exciting part of your strategic plan, and that is the financial perspective. I'm sure it's going to keep you all just jazzed. But stick with us because I promise that there will not be any Excel documents and sheets that you need to flip through. So your financial perspective of your financial plan goes hand in hand, if you are a nonprofit, with your fund development plan. We'll talk a little bit about that. But here are some goals and the measures to those goals that you want to review when you're creating the financial perspective. So how are we going to survive? How are we going to succeed? And how are we going to prosper? And then the ways that you measure that is, what does our cash flow look like? What does our quarterly sales growth look like? You can certainly divide that up by division. And then how are we going to increase our market share? In the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some questions that you should be asking yourself, regardless of if you're a business or a nonprofit. And you're going to hear all 4 of us say that a lot during this webinar, because this perspective and balanced approach works for both businesses and nonprofits. So some financial questions that you want to ask yourself is, how do we look financially? What is the financial outlook that we have with our shareholders, our board of directors? How do we look to our customers, our community, our leaders, our donors? And how do we financially look to the community as a whole? The reason that this is important is because you will find board members, donors, shareholders that will know of your company based on the financial perspective in the community about your company. So if you're a company or an organization that is financially sound or financially struggling, that information is known. If you're a nonprofit, your 990 is out there. But I've had board members and donors want to look at our finances before they invest for 2 reasons. I have people that want a startup project, and I have people that don't want to invest in an agency that might be suffering. They really want their investment to go someplace that's financially sound because they know that you're going to be there, your investment's going to be there, and your growth is going to be there. That is not to say that there are not people that are not looking to help, especially during times of crisis and need. So on the next slide, we're going to talk through a little bit about what your financial perspective should be looking at. Are you contributing to the company's bottom line? And this again is for nonprofits as well as businesses. Are you setting up growth goals for your nonprofits? Are they working well with your programmatic goals? For businesses, what does that look like for you? Do you have fund development and financial goals that go hand in hand to one another? Are those two departments speaking specifically to one another? Is your finance department and your sales team reviewing their goals together in your strategic plan? And then you want to look at some short-term goals, like maybe a single campaign or a profit made in one area in your business, and some long-term goals, like your overall budget growth and the investment that you're either making back into your community if you're a nonprofit, or if you're a business, are you taking that money that you make and investing it right back into your business? So this is the financial perspective in some of the areas that nonprofits can look like. And if you're a business, don't go anywhere yet because you're my very next slide. So here are some areas that you can look at as your financial perspective and fund development perspective for your strategic plan as a nonprofit. You can look to just increase your committees, your fund development committee, your board, your event committees. You can look to increase just your campaigns or your individual donations. You can look at increasing and even decreasing your events. That can be a very strategic part of your plan to really move away from grants or events. My recommendation and our recommendation at Capital CFO is that what we tend to do as business leaders or leaders of our nonprofits is we want to do all of this. And this is certainly the mistake that I made when I was the CEO of a nonprofit. Do not attempt to look at your budget and increase absolutely every part of your area, because what you are easily going to find is that everybody's going to feel like a failure, yourself included, because what happens is everything gets watered down. So what I learned, and it took me a long time to learn this, and I just continuously made this mistake over and over and over again, is I picked one area of my budget, and I did that for about 6 to 9 years. And I would focus my time, effort, attention, investment, all in that one area. So in my last few years with the organization that I ran, what I said to my team and my board was, we are going to keep our budget completely stable, make it look exactly what it looked like last year. And the only area I'm going to diversify in is individual donations. So instead of diversifying your funding in all areas of my budget, I picked one area and I diversified my funding in that one area. What that looked like for me is we invested in a major gifts donor. We invested in our campaign person. So we had somebody that was focused on campaigns and donations from $25 to $250,000 and everything in between. Because again, we were looking to diversify just this one area of our budget. Next, we're going to talk about businesses. And here's some things that you can really ask yourself as a business for your strategic plan. Are you going to look to increase your customer base? Are you going to look to retain your current customers? Are you going to look to expand your services and products, increase your staff and your reach? Are you going to look to increase your marketing strategy and invest in marketing in that time? And again, just because I'm so zen and all-knowing, when I switched from being the leader of a nonprofit to owning my business, I, of course, made none of those same mistakes. And I hopped right on board and said, I'm going to pick one thing. Totally kidding. Made the same mistakes all over again. So I, once again, in my first year, focused on everything. And I was like, how do I make everything expand and grow and keep the people that I have and work on my marketing and make sure? And it didn't work. Of course it didn't work because everything got watered down. So what I quickly learned is I needed to invest my time in one thing at a time, give it a solid year, really focus my efforts on it, and then from there, move on to my next thing. So I'm now in the phase of my company where this year I focused 100% of my effort on my team. I invested in my staff, I invested in my people, I invested in growing my team. And then from there, the ripple effect is that the customers that I have are continuing to stay with me. My customers are now growing because I have the team that are able to support those people right away. People are starting to know about me because my team, who I've now invested in and cares about this company like I do, is talking about us. So again, that's just one perspective in one area, and you can do that with any one of these areas. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Katie while she talks about the customer perspective.
Great, thank you, Sabrina. And Sabrina did kind of lead us very naturally into this next perspective, because this is really where we want to think about our customer, who we're working with, and who we're trying to satisfy as we develop our business plan. So when we reflect on the customer's perspective, we're really asking ourselves, how do our customers see us? And how do we want them to see us? As well as what do they need from us? And this applies across the board to nonprofits and businesses, whether you're providing a product or a service. What does the customer need, and what do we exist to provide to the customer? And how can we do that better? And then you take the opportunity to translate your mission and purpose, which, as Liz pointed out in the various steps of strategic planning, you've already defined. And you develop specific measures that reflect the priorities of your customer. And the balanced scorecard really prioritizes these 4 areas to consider from the customer perspective. And we're going to go through each of them one by one. So first off is time. Time really talks about the time required to meet the customer's needs. And this applies, again, whether you are developing and producing a product, or if you provide a service. It's really the time from when a customer reaches out to you and says, I want what you've got, and when you're able to deliver that. So it's similar in nonprofits, where you're generally tending to provide more of a service. It's the time when a customer reaches out regarding their need to the time when that need is being met, and how quickly that is compared to the customer's perspective. And similar in business, especially if we think about product delivery. If your customer expects a turnaround time of 2 days, are you able to provide that? Are you able to set a goal to decrease that time to better meet your customer's needs? Or is there some other way that you can consider time as a goal and measure to meet your customer's needs and really wants as well? Then we also look at quality, and this is the quality of the product or service as measured by the customer. So yes, you would have your own quality measures, and certainly many businesses have quality assurance teams internally, but you also want to consider whether or not the customer perceives a level of quality as compared to the competition. So this is where you're really going to be examining customer satisfaction, your ability to meet needs, that on-time delivery factor as points of quality measure. And then we move into performance and service. And of course, performance kind of has a similar tone as quality, but in performance and service, we're really looking at creating the value for our customer. What does the customer want or need? And does our product or service meet that want or need? For nonprofits, we mostly focus here on the ability to affect change in a person, whereas in business, it's the ability to meet the needs of the customer and hopefully exceed those needs as well. It also kind of begs the question and leads us into our next session on if the customer is getting enough value and kind of quote unquote bang for their buck. If the value is perceived based on meeting their need as well as being appropriately priced. And this leads us to cost. So that's the 4th section that I reviewed. And this is really the cost of providing the service or product to the customer, but also any costs that a customer may incur to access those products or services. For a nonprofit where we're not always very profit driven, you still need to consider, are you covering your costs? Do you have enough funding to come in? Do you need to identify, do you need to go back to your financial perspective to consider how you can cover costs to deliver your product or service? And for businesses, you're really looking at that net profit. Is the product or service profitable? And are there ways you can change those margins to improve your bottom line? So that's just very little bit about the customer perspective. And now I'm going to turn it over to Liz to talk about the innovation and learning perspective.
Thanks, Katie. So again, this is the fourth or the third quadrant that we'll be talking about for the balanced scorecard. And I just want to kind of remind everybody of the arrows that you see on this graphic. These are all really interconnected. So just something to keep in mind as we talk about all of these. Right, for the innovation and learning perspective, this quadrant is really important because a company's ability to innovate, improve, and learn ties directly to that company's value. So this is, and this is one I think that is sometimes overlooked in traditional strategic planning, this ability to be nimble, to innovate, and to learn. So the questions that you might ask in this quadrant as you're working on your strategic plan: how can we continue to improve and create value? And to achieve our vision, how will we sustain our ability to change and improve? And this is where we're really called upon to invest in staff and employees, because your staff are the people who will drive innovation and will come up with new ways of doing things and have perspective on what's happening on the ground and what's happening internally in your company. So this is where, again, we're really called upon to invest in people and employees. And I think that's a thread that goes through all of these quadrants, including including finance. For example, Sabrina talked about her investment in the financial quadrant, or in her strategic plan, was to hire a development director to work specifically on individual giving. So it really all comes back to the people. And on our next slide, so here's some examples. For example, what might that look like? So a question as an example that a company might ask, or a goal to come up with, is: we must sustain our ability to change and improve through the intensification of training and qualification of employees. So that's how they're choosing to invest in their employees. And then how they might measure that is by verifying the number of hours spent in training and the number of certificates achieved by employees in outsourced courses. So that's a really specific example of what this might look like for a given business. Another example, the objective, for example, could be to have a skilled sales force, and the goal, train 100% of our sales force, and how you might measure that are the number of certificates acquired by the team. It could be something of the education level too of your staff. For example, to have a staff that's extremely knowledgeable in product development, you might want to hire someone with a master's degree in product development, or choose a current employee to receive training or to enter into a master's degree program. So just a couple of examples. So the result of focusing on innovation and learning will impact your company's ability to do all these things: launch new products, create more value for customers. Again, goes back to that customer perspective, improve operating efficiencies. And all of these in turn will allow you to penetrate new markets or increase your market share, revenues, and margins. So this is one of those vital quadrants for strategic planning that, again, is sometimes overlooked, I think. So that's why this balanced scorecard is so useful. And now a little bit of focus on nonprofits. Nonprofits should also be asking this question: how can we continue to improve and create value? And you could substitute the word impact for value there. How can we have greater impact on individuals or in the community? And to achieve our mission, how do we sustain our ability to change and improve? This is important for the nonprofit sector, because nonprofits have a responsibility to the individuals and communities we all serve to be as effective as possible. Your stewardship of donors, dollars, or grant funding, foundation funding, part of the responsibility, I believe, of nonprofits is to steward those funds well and to use them in the most impactful way possible. And also, in parallel with that, nonprofits that can demonstrate that they're truly making an impact will be the ones most likely to attract more resources and talent. So it feeds on itself. And I think for nonprofits, this investment in people that this innovation and learning quadrant calls on us to do, I think unfortunately nonprofits often underinvest in staff development and in their people. And although, you know, we're really, nonprofit is a very mission-driven quadrant, a mission-driven sector. Often nonprofits work on budgets that are thin, staff is overworked and stretched. So we often, the last place that we spend resources is in our staff, which I think is unfortunate and misguided. So this innovation and learning quadrant brings attention to that. So it's very useful for nonprofits. And the last thing I will say is that another aspect of this innovation and learning quadrant for nonprofits is program evaluation. So in addition to direct investment in employees and staff, program evaluation is actually very important as well. So how well do we do what we're doing? What are the outcomes and the community impact of the programs that we work with? So that's a little bit, really quick overview of the innovation and learning quadrant. And the next or final quadrant that we'll be talking about is the internal business perspective. And this really looks at focusing on the critical internal operations that help satisfy customer needs. You have to decide what processes and competencies that you are going to excel at. And again, another emphasis, build your people and culture to support your plan. So again, it echoes that thread that's gone through all of this, and investment in people. And for this is why we felt it was really important to partner with Integra HR, because they can speak directly to this internal business perspective. So I'm going to let Jennifer speak now.
Thank you so much, Liz. So let's take that deeper dive of integrating that balanced scorecard methodology with cultural assessments, as well as leadership development to achieve high performance. So what we've learned so far is, and I think Katie said it best, talking about the 4 areas of the strategic planning using that balanced scorecard method. Communicating what we are trying to accomplish. It's all about the priorities and projects and products or services that we're delivering, how we measure and monitor that progress towards that goal achievement. But it's really all about aligning that day-to-day work that employees are doing with the strategy. So let's ask a question. Take a few seconds. Why don't leaders consider doing a cultural assessment as the first part of their strategic planning process? So if you want to take a few minutes and in the chat room, put in some responses, that would be great. Anyone have any thoughts?
Here we go. So Sabrina says, always busy putting out fires. Sarah, they assume their culture is great. Wendy commented, they don't value the squishy culture stuff. Kathleen, they're afraid of the answer. That's a good point. Erin comments, some may not see the value of culture.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for those responses. So let's move on to the next slide. So kind of what gets in the way? And so I like some of the answers about, the squishy or not necessarily understanding the impact. So when we look at culture, many times when we're going through that strategic goal attainment process, right, or that strategy planning, we're really focusing in on the external factors, right? That customer perspective, our donors, our funding streams, our oversight or regulatory agencies. But what about the employees? Are they working towards that common goal? And understanding why they may or may not be is really key. Is it about poor communication? Do we not communicate the plan? Do employees lack the understanding of how their actual work aligns or fits in with their mission? Is it our leadership? Or is it something else? And what we do understand about being able to achieve goals is it does boil down to leadership skills. How much have we invested within that? Poor leadership can really lead to poor employee attitude and behaviors. And not understanding that need to look internally, right? That internal perspective and business operation and assess that organizational culture can really lead towards poor goal attainment. Our culture can really make or break that strategic plan because we need those employees to buy in. We need them to understand what it is that they need to do every day, and we need them to implement. So what is culture all about? So Harvard Business Review says that culture is about our vision and our values and mission. Katie covered that. We talk a little bit about what our practice is, our people, our narrative, and our place. But it goes much deeper than that, I think. And I love this Investopedia definition of culture because it really talks about behaviors and beliefs that determine how our organization's employees and management interact internally and then handle our outside business transactions. So the people that we support, the services or products that we deliver to our clients or customers. And often our corporate culture is implied, and it really develops organically over time from some traits of the people that our companies hire. It's really reflected in things like our dress code, our business hours, how our offices are set up, how our employee benefits are structured, what is our turnover number, our hiring decisions, how we treat our clients or customers, what is their satisfaction level, and really every single aspect of the operations of our business. So what are some key items to consider about culture? Culture is formed or transformed by everything that we do in business. A new hire learns what it takes to fit in and adapt, and adapting reinforces those norms. So I've been a new hire, and I've learned very quickly the quote unquote unwritten rules as soon as I start that new position or role in an organization. It's not necessarily about the written down policies, practices, and procedures, but it can be about what is happening within that culture and my ability to fit and adapt with that. Workplaces, as we all know, are fast-paced. They can be complex, whether we have the technology or not, because sometimes our paper or manual processes can be overwhelming, and we are diverse. And those positive cultures can really support achievement, while negative cultures can really impact our performance. Our culture is about an organization's purpose. It's our vision and our strategy. That's actually how we put it into action. That can be good or it can be bad. For example, and we've all been through this, right? We have leaders that allow a project or program to run over budget, or do they make sure that it gets in on time and within the financial restraints? Are our leaders ignoring strategic goals, or are they talking about them on a regular basis? Or are we addressing or not addressing our client and staff frustrations? So when we talk about trying to transform cultures, we really need to focus in on the success of a culture is really dependent upon the leaders that we have in place. So I'd like to ask another question. So have you ever promoted or been in an organization that promoted an employee because they were technically good at their job, thinking that they would be a great leader, a supervisor, or a manager? So I'm seeing that we are getting some overwhelming response here in the yes category. I think we're at 100% for this particular pool. And so I certainly have been part of organizations, guilty as charged, where I identified somebody who was a phenomenal technical asset to the organization, thinking that they could make that most challenging conversion from peer to leader, right? And the organizations that I have been with or was in at the time did not invest in helping that leader to do that transformation, because it's very different sitting side by side and working along with colleagues and leading them to be able to achieve goals. And so it comes down to what Liz highlighted, which is many times our organizations don't look at how to invest in leadership and why that leadership development is so important. It not only increases productivity, but employee retention. We can focus in on succession planning and developing future leaders. So identifying people that do have those leadership capabilities and then helping get them in place, because we know people are going to retire. We know people are going to move on from our organizations. It can increase that all important employee engagement. They feel committed to the organization and the mission, the vision, and the values that you have. You can culturally align how your leadership style and your approach to doing business is actually integrated right within your culture, and that people, again, are feeling that connection all throughout the organization. It increases the ability for your leaders to effectively make decisions, and it can reduce your liability. So that success of your strategic plan is really dependent on leadership and culture. So if your leaders do need that strengthening, it needs to be addressed, or you're not going to achieve your goals, which is the ultimate outcome that you want. So why do we want to do a cultural assessment? We want to have goal attainment, maximize our revenue, cut our costs. We want to increase productivity. We also want to generate a level of enthusiasm and accountability for your employees so that they feel involved. We want a sense of openness and inclusion because it really builds trust that's required for a healthy culture. And many times we're not able to step back and look at ourselves as an organization to do that. So having an outside organization come in and do that independent review and looking at some quantitative and qualitative findings, right? Some of the squishy, but also some of the very concrete items can build confidence in the integrity of that process. And it also can provide leaders and organizations a comprehensive context and information about issues that not only are within departments or units, but really cut across the entire organization. Everyone at all the levels will understand that their input really does matter and that their voices are heard, even if you don't implement specific changes. But depending upon how you communicate the information and show and demonstrate how you are implementing some of the outcomes from that cultural assessment, you will gain more and more buy-in. In addition, leaders can really identify some very key strategic elements and initiatives. And then that big picture is really balanced with the day-to-day work of those that are responsible for executing the strategies. And I think Sabrina said it really well. You want to focus in on some key issues and items, not the whole menu. Because I've been there, done that, right? And then you've got this big laundry list of things that you're trying to accomplish. And then what happened with my strategic plans is they got put on the shelf and dust started to accumulate because it can be overwhelming. So you want to be able to pick those key initiatives and elements. So what might a cultural assessment look like? So you might want to engage in an assessment or a survey process where you can focus in on some of these particular topic areas. Focusing in on employee role. Is it clear? Are they using their skills? Does this fit with their career objectives? You can assess an immediate work team, the morale, the collegiality. Are they equitable amongst the group? How is their immediate supervision? Is there trust there? Are they getting feedback and support? How does your employee population view senior management and leadership? Do they trust them? Are they visible? Do they have a clear purpose? Are your leaders modeling the values within your organization? You can also look at organizational effectiveness, planning, policies, process, change management, communications. Do you have an open door policy? Are you actually practicing that open door policy, or is it something that's just on a piece of paper? You can look at organizational culture. Is it transparent? Does it encourage people to improve and innovate? Which again, we understand that innovation is key to the strategic planning model. Is it engaging? Is that culture within your organization engaging? How do employees truly feel about not only leadership, but the organization overall? Are they willing to refer you to others to have them come join the team? So are they doing the employee referrals, and are they advocating based on the mission or vision or the values of your organization? And you can also look at things like total rewards. How do your benefits and your compensation, what are their feelings around that? How does that stack up? The next part might be to take whatever your assessment information is and then dig a little bit deeper. So looking at that focus group and pulling together small groups, 10 to 15 maybe, taking some of the feedback from that assessment and survey and digging a little bit deeper by involving a group of a cross-section of your staff to provide even more information so you can make some informed decisions. So we go from planning to maybe some assessment to the focus group methodology. And then the next slide, we talk a little bit about relationship between individuals to mission. And this is really talking about where are those gaps, right, in your culture. because the mission, vision, and values, right, that we have, we talk about strategy, how we're going to measure, and then our action plans. But it's really based on the individual contributions. And are they feeding directly back into your mission? Are they living and breathing your values and your mission, following the strategy and contributing on a day-to-day basis? So let's talk a little bit about some of that alignment with your culture, with your strategy. So if our employees are not connecting directly to that particular strategy, what does that mean? Maybe we need to make an effective communication plan and make that a key goal. It needs to be well designed and very simple. Employees can articulate how their day-to-day work fits into the strategy and impacts mission. Let me give you an example. Maybe your organization struggles with transportation, and that's an issue for maybe the clients that you serve or support in accessing your particular program. And so if our employees understand that transportation is something globally that we're trying to work on, but their day-to-day interaction is ensuring that that client, either they're meeting with them in person or that client is coming to them and meeting with them and receiving those particular services, when they resolve or help to resolve the transportation challenges, they are then meeting the bigger goal of ensuring that their clients need to have transportation and they're trying to resolve globally a transportation issue or access to services. So again, they can tie directly back with, this is what I'm doing every day, to what's happening at a high level. You want to align your values with your vision. So the core values are more than just your strategic drivers. They are really key in your talent acquisition. One of the biggest things that people list are the top reason for accepting or declining a position is the values of that culture. So if they are aligned with that, they will say, I value you and your team. Sometimes organizations also miss the mark on their mission statement. Many times, and I've seen this in organizations that I've worked at, I haven't even been able to articulate what the mission of the organization was. It was very long. Maybe it was something that I really connected with and understood, but I wasn't able to articulate it. So you want to make sure that your mission statement is very simple and very clear. An employee should be able to say or recite your mission statement and understand how, again, their work supports and aligns with it. And the last part is engaging your people in the success. So really, employees are the foundation to achieving those results, including having them part of that planning process because it creates that healthy culture and allows them to own the execution of your organizational strategies. So last but not least, culture, or the people that we support, that is the strategy, and the strategic achievement is realized through your culture and your people. I'd like to focus in on one of the things that we promised as part of this process and this presentation was a handout or a tool. So I kind of walked through a couple of the phases in the planning process if you wanted to attempt to do a cultural assessment. One is you would plan. What are the areas that you focus in on within that cultural assessment? Phase one of a diagnosis might be that, again, assessment and survey. You would want to report those results out and debrief. You would also want to focus in on phase two, which is taking some focus groups, reporting out on the results and debriefing. And then spending a considerable amount of time within phase three, which is really that gap analysis, making some recommendations and action plans tied directly back to your strategic plan. So is this some intervention with leadership development? Is this some intervention with programs or other changes that need to take place systematically within your organization? So some policies and procedures that may be getting in the way of your staff being able to fully execute their roles and achieve their goals. And the last piece would be implementing and communicating and tying things, again, directly back to that strategic plan. And I always talk about keeping it simple, right? So again, can the employees understand what it is and articulate it? So we want to ensure that both the survey and focus group participants and respondents are acknowledged. We want to talk a little bit about our process of analysis and interpreting and disseminating those results and doing it in a timely and transparent manner. And then any initiatives that you develop based on all of that feedback and information, that you are communicating and implementing it. And again, keeping it simple to a 2 or 3 prong approach, because it's really ultimately about our clients and our customers, our employees, and our culture. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it off to Katie.
Great, thank you. So we also have some additional tools relating back to the balanced scorecard. All of this is going to be sent to those of you who have participated today via email, but I'll review it very quickly. So here we have an example of a balanced scorecard strategic plan. You'll see the mission is at the center. This is a dummy company that I made up. And so we've outlined 3 objectives for each area. And this comes back to the recommendations we've been making all along, which is not to overcommit yourself and instead to focus in on those areas that you're really trying to improve. So we don't have 10 targets for each section. We have 3. We recommend about 3 to 5. And what you're able to do once you've identified your overall strategic plan, because oftentimes your strategic plan is going to be over the course of several years, you can then develop an action plan and report card. And so here we have an example of what an action plan might look like. And this is where you can break down each section and each of the deliverables that you've identified into very actionable steps year by year. And this is also intended to be a means to measure those actionable steps so you can determine if you're making the change that you want to see. So very quickly here, what you see is I've identified the customer section and outlined one of the goals under the customer section, which is partner with customers to create solutions to technology needs, because this is a technology company. So we've identified some actionable steps: implement a product review process, conduct annual customer service evaluation. So those are the deliverables that we're going to measure, in fact, on a quarterly basis. We've identified who's responsible for measuring that and reporting that back, and also identified a baseline. And you'll have to determine for yourself what that baseline is. Is the baseline last year's metrics? Is the baseline a goal that you want to establish as a baseline? And then you'll identify goals per quarter and leave room to then monitor your progress per quarter as well. And you'll see here, this company has made it through half the year. So they've identified goals for all 4 quarters, but they've reported only on the first 2 quarters because they haven't quite completed the 3rd quarter. And they've also utilized a color coding system to make it even more obvious where they're meeting or not yet meeting their marks per quarter. So in the 1st quarter, under the 1st action step, they had a goal for 20 reviews. They only received 18. They had a goal for a 4.2 star rating. However, they got a 4.3 star rating. So they've really found a way to show themselves, okay, we're meeting it or we're not. And then it looks like next quarter, they really ramped up their efforts to get those product reviews back because they had then exceeded their goal. So over the course of time, they're still exceeding their goal so far this year. But this is a really great way to be able to see, okay, here's where we need to focus in. We also included a column for year-end totals as well, so you can get that full picture for the year. The action plan and report card are really, really helpful because they allow for a lot of flexibility. This is the piece that you can change year to year as you're looking at what you're going to focus on for the year in fulfilling your strategic plan. And you may even find, although not always, you may find that you're making adjustments throughout the year. So that's a great tool. And as I said, all of these tools are going to be provided by email along with the recording from today. And so at this point, we want to open up the line to some questions. And we do have a couple questions in the chat box already. Feel free, if you have any questions or comments, to go ahead and enter them in there. You can also use the raise your hand feature and we can unmute your line and you can ask our presenters directly. So I'm going to get started with one of the questions that's already on. And that is from David. David's asking, just curious, where do external changes and influences such as environmental changes like our pandemic and our competition enter into the suggested strategic plan and the balanced scorecard approach? He further clarifies, he's asking about threats, especially from competition, where they fit into strategic planning. So I don't know, Sabrina, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so if you go back to our PowerPoint presentation when Liz went through the steps of your strategic plan, there is a step in there of creating long and short-term goals. And we would say that's probably where you want to do your SWOT analysis. So your SWOT analysis is learning your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And some of those threats might be the competition, and you really want to get a handle on that. And again, something you can incorporate with your team to really get a handle on that, to really get an overall view of what other people are saying and hearing. I did this for my organization. I did it way too late. So this is what we're saying. None of us on this call are perfect. We're actually learning from the mistakes that we've made in our past. But yeah, when I did a SWOT analysis, I did it with my leaders first. And it really opened up the conversation of what they saw as their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it allowed us to have a really open discussion with it, with somebody across the table from us.
And I was going to say the same thing. I think that's the perfect place because the innovation and learning perspective also allows you that opportunity to invest in your team to respond to threats. So Leslie asks, specifically, what individual and/or organizational cultural assessment do you use in working with clients? So this one I want to open up to Jennifer and also Sabrina if you have any comments.
So Leslie, I think that's a great question. And really our approach when we're working with clients is to do a customized cultural assessment. And the reason for that is we do know a lot about the organizations that we are within. However, we also know that we have some blind spots. So working to do an individualized or customized approach to that cultural assessment really works well, and I'll tell you why. Specifically, when we're looking at leadership, it's very difficult, right, to want to frame or articulate questions around assessing us as leaders within the organization or executive leadership. And so you want to kind of have that outside individual pushing you a little bit to say, hey, what about this question? And let's focus in on this particular area. So, because again, it can be difficult in putting some of those tough questions out there because it comes down to, right, feeling uncomfortable and being in that uncomfortable spot. But in addition to that, some other areas in assessing an employee's role. You might want to ask some very specific questions around that, and those are really individualized based on the type of organization you are and the type of work that the employees are doing. So I tend to take a very customized approach to making sure that the questions are valid and that they work for the organization. Sabrina, I don't know if you have anything else you want to.
I was going to say contact Jennifer immediately.
Yeah, thank you. You're so very kind.
Great. So we also have Sarah asking, how do you get leadership on board to change if they have been doing the same thing for years and keep resisting? And Sabrina, I know you have a great example of how you've utilized your action plans as a part of ongoing planning. So I'm going to turn this over to you.
So I think it depends on where you are within the agency, but my recommendation is going to be open lines of communication. And it is so difficult to do, and I completely understand. But if you bring information to your leadership team, and if you bring specific examples, and if you bring data, not feelings, but actual factual data, it is up to a leader to take that information in and decide what to do with it. And then it is up to you as the employee if you are satisfied with that leader's direction and how they're moving forward. Most leaders have a leader. Most leaders have somebody else that they are reporting to. So now it's up to you again as the employee to figure out what to do. This is difficult, it's conflict. I'm definitely going to say, to call Jennifer through this process, but I do have a client that I'm working with right now who is struggling with this right now. And what I am telling all of their employees is that you have an avenue. You have a way to change. If you all get together and just talk about it together, it's not effective. It might feel good in the moment, but it's only going to get worse. And real leaders want to hear from their people. They want to know how they're doing. They want feedback. And real leaders want to make sure that they are creating a culture of growth and a little bit of warmth. So I am sure Jennifer has so many other ways to get through to leaders, but that would be my input and suggestion.
Do you mind if I just add something quickly?
Yes, please do. You're the expert in this.
Right. No, and one of the things you're actually talking about is triangulation, right? So the group is talking amongst themselves, but not necessarily including the leader in that process, because sometimes we have blind spots. We all do as leaders. I've been there. And if somebody's not articulating and telling me what those challenges are and what we need to work on together to overcome that, I don't have that opportunity. But we also have worked with leaders or maybe even our peers, because we're all within that leadership group, that are really resistant to that. And so then it comes down to tough conversations, but being able to frame it. And I really like Sabrina's, talk about data, but then also talk about the reality and some specific examples around what the impact is and how we're not necessarily maybe living up to the values or within the organization or what our mission and vision are, and getting at it from that perspective. And then sometimes it's having to make some tough choices around leadership, right? So whether it's, helping that individual to realize, is this a good fit for them right now or any longer? Or is it a matter of what do we need to do to invest and develop them kind of around that innovation and learning perspective, and looking at the business operations of the organization and how they can contribute and continue to push the organization forward? Or is it something where, you need to decide to move on? But I think using data and some examples and then confronting and talking about the issues specifically will really help there.
And we also have a recommendation from David again. He recommends the book Managing Your Manager by Dufour, and that he thinks could help with this. So it might be something that some of you want to look at. All right, and that's the end of our questions at this point. Certainly feel free to add anything to the chat box.
Before we wrap up, I just want to go back to the few that responded that they don't know if they have a strategic plan. Leaders, if you're on the call, this is a really good opportunity for you to open up that discussion with your team if you do have one. And for those of you that are not leaders that don't know if you have one, it's a really good opportunity for you to go back to your team and ask, do we have one? Can we take a look? And are we living it? Some good ways that the four of us have really worked a strategic plan is, for example, when I was running an agency, I incorporated my strategic plan in the agenda of my board meetings. So every single agenda piece looped right back to what the board was saying they were going to be focusing on for the next 3 years. And that's how I also conducted my staff meetings, so that my team was aware of what our operating plan was for that year and then strategically where we were going. I really want to thank Jennifer Mazzi from Integra HR. You were such a wonderful resource and partner. I also want to thank my team, Katie and Liz, for all of their hard work. This entire presentation was developed by Katie, and Liz worked really hard on so much of the content. So thank you guys so much. And Jennifer, thank you. We can't thank you enough. This is how you contact all of us, so feel free to be in touch. We're going to share all of our tools, resources, the recording, as well as the information. So if there were any questions in the chat box that we didn't get to, we'll be sure to follow up with you specifically on those. Have a great morning, everybody.